everyone, how's it going? Vasco here from the Angular University. In this lesson we're going to see how to debug RxJS code in general. So as we can see, the DevTools, the Redux DevTools that help us debug NGRX store, they have a lot of features, but take a look. Our program still relies heavily on RxJS. This is normal. NGRX store is meant to be integrated heavily with RxJS, so we will have a lot of observable chains in our program. Like for example here, if we would like to debug this chain of operators to see what's going on here, what we usually do in RxJS programs is we use the do operator, which is an operator that it's meant to cause side effects. So we are going to get here the value that it's being emitted at this point. And what we usually do is we add console log statements here. So let's say that we add here action received, and separated by commas we can output here the value that is being emitted at this point in the observable operator chain. We can then add here another value after the switch map to say, for example, data received via the HTTP request that we just made. And again, we're going to log the value that we received at this point. So let's run our program and see what would this look like in the console. And we're going to see a better way of doing this in a moment. So with the changes applied, let's switch back to our browser and have a look at the console. So as one would expect, we have here action received, and here we have the action. In this case, there is no payload. And then we have here data received via the HTTP request, and we have here the payload that just arrived from the backend. So this type of logging would allow us to debug these RxJS chains of observable that typically contain a lot of functionality in them before we get to the point where the processing is completed and we dispatch something that goes to the store. Then the DevTools will help us to troubleshoot what is the current state of our application, but how that new state is calculated, what are the intermediate steps. For that, we would benefit from something like this. So the problem is, if we ship this to production, we are going to have logging statements everywhere. We might not want this. The logging also might become very verbose, and there aren't different levels of logging. The ideal situation would be that we would be able to turn on development logging when we are doing development at a reasonable level, let's say at a debug level, not at a trace level, and we would have multiple levels of logging available. That would be the ideal situation. In production, we would turn the logging off. This would avoid to have to add systematically these do operator calls here in our program, and then if we don't want them in production, we have to remove them. If we have to debug again this part of the code, we would have to add them back again. So that would not be very convenient. So what would be the ideal solution? It would be something like this. We would have here, for example, a debug operator, we can call it like that, that would only trigger this logging statement if the logging level of our application is set to debug, typically in development mode. And also we wouldn't necessarily want to put in here the value each time, because each time we would like to log the value at this point. So we would prefer to have something like this: debug and action received. Or for example, debug data received via HTTP request. And this would trigger this logging statement that we have here, where the text of the message would be put here, and in front of it we would get the payload. So the value of the observable that is being emitted at this point in the operator chain. We could even have other operators like info or trace, or even error, so only emit this in case of error. It would be important to be able to log errors using console.error so that we have a full stack trace at the point where the error occurred. Another useful thing to have would be logging whenever the observable is completed, because there are a lot of issues that happen due to the fact that either an observable is not completed and should have been completed, or we thought that it was completed but it was not yet the case. So being able to log the current value of the observable at this point in a debug log, being able to log errors, being able to log observable completion. All of that really helps to better understand our RxJS program. So let's see how we can build a small RxJS utility that will allow us to do this, do some debugging in our program. Let's have a look how can we do it.